Hey everyone, so I am happy to present some leaked footage from the upcoming April update to World of Tanks Console Edition, and I'm actually really excited to show this to you because they have taken a lot of feedback for the past 3 months or so and have integrated them back into the game to make it much better. So what you're seeing here is the combination of all that work, and it's just to make the entire experience more playable for those of us that miss the old style of gameplay, and also just the old style of the graphics and everything else. So one of the things I like to start off with is, as I'm recording this using the PlayStation Share Factory recorder, I'm looking at a very small window. It's approximately half of my television screen, so it's approximating about a 32-inch television monitor, and even at this reduced size I can still see very clearly at the very top the different icons for your different tank classes for both teams. That you can tell your heavy tanks, your medium tanks, and your light tanks, and your tank destroyers, and it's easy to tell those tanks apart. So that heavy icon and that medium icon, because they're much larger, it's very easy to distinguish visually between the two. That was a problem with the newer updates, with what I'm calling the beta test version of this game, where they've made those icons so small, and even though they have black outlines just like the way you see them here, because of the size of those icons, even on a large television, like this TV is actually a 65-inch TV, even on a large television, when I'm playing at a distance, when I'm sitting on the couch far away from the TV, it sometimes is still very hard to distinguish between heavies and mediums. Here, even though the screen now is half the size of what the actual screen is, because again I'm recording this on the PlayStation Share Factory, I can still tell the difference between my different tank classes at the very top. The other nice thing that they've added is the new fonts. So the fonts that they've been experimenting with for the past 4 months or so were hard to read. They basically had these very thin vertical lines, and again at a distance of greater than 2 feet, those became nearly impossible to read even with a large TV. Here the fonts are much more wider, there is much more of a clarity to them, and again, looking at the small mini monitor that I am using the Share Factory software, I can very easily read, oh, that's a Trailblazer, his name is Atlas Daddy, and I just hit him for 406 damage. One of the nice things they did here, which they didn't do until this past update, is they also got rid of the numerical display for damage to modules that used to flare up as a white number versus a red number. Here what they've done is they basically just made it a yellow number, or red, or green, depending on whether or not it is an enemy tank being hit, red, green if it's a friendly tank being hit, or yellow if it's a tank that you've hit from your gun. So it's very clear distinctively where that damage was coming from, what the value of that damage was, and of course when you have it moused over and they're in the center, you can see all that information very clearly, including also the tier of the tank, the name of the tank, the driver of the tank, the hit point bar, and also the actual numerical hit point indicator. So all that's very clearly laid out, very clearly presented, and very easy to read. It's something that they weren't able to achieve in the prior versions, but I'm very excited that they've fixed it and they've actually reintroduced it into this version. One thing that I absolutely love beyond all love is the fact that that aim reticle is back to its perfect circle shape, and that it's very bright white. So it has a nice thickness to it, it's very easy to read, and especially on winter maps where that can get lost, that no longer gets lost. It's very, very clear where that is, and it's very distinctive. The previous one they used prior to this was a broken circle, and with, depending on terrain or what you might be looking at while you're driving around, that might get lost. So they've done a great job, they've reintroduced that, and it's fantastic. One of the really nice things that they've done is also within the center of the screen, within that middle area of the screen, you also now have the reload and health as a bar, as sort of a visual representation. So your eyes aren't hunting to the various corners of your screen, because once again, if you are playing on one of those larger TV screens, 65, 70, 80 something inches, your eyes have quite a bit of distance to travel to see all those different values, but for your tank now you can see very clearly, oh, I'm still at full health, and oh, I'm fully loaded. I fired a shot, and now my reload is going back up, and now I'm no longer at full health, and I can tell that just by staring at the middle of the screen. I don't have to move my eyes off of that. So it's fantastic that they have that feature. It's something that they lacked in the last update, and it's something I'm happy to see brought back. Some other things I'm noticing. So the overall icons themselves, because they moved away from that prior update's just black and white symbolism, which was hard to decipher and has always been hard to decipher, they've reverted to something that uses multiple different colors and uses very distinctive shapes and figures. So instead of just two identical looking boxes with only a very slight difference in the tiny little module icon to designate whether or not that's a health consumable or if it's a repair consumable. In this one, they're completely different icons. There's no way you can mistake that little health pack for the little two sets of gears that you see next to it, which the health pack being for health and the gears being for repairs. Obviously, fire extinguishers have always been fire extinguishers. That's kind of easy to tell. The other nice thing on the bottom is the way they've done ammo. Instead of having a very arbitrary looking diamond-shaped pattern with just a little splashy effect which designates the type of ammo, here you can tell there's different thicknesses to the ammo round. There's a very clear stripe, and very simple stripe with a bit of color to it which designates what type of ammo it is, and also on the very bottom you can see the numerical value of how much ammo you've got left. So that's very clear, that's very easily laid out, that's easy to read. The nice thing about also the formatting of all this, the actual messages when your team is pinging something on a map, or when you've destroyed somebody, or anything else that might be important to the player, is displayed on the bottom of the middle of the HUD, which is fantastic. And over off onto the sides, you can see whether or not you have a teammate speaking to you, whatever have you. But you also have the return of that ribbon system that we loved. So the great thing about the ribbons is, unlike the XP calculation, which is given to you live during a game, which doesn't really help you in the middle of a game, the ribbons actually do help you in the middle of the game because it tells you how much kills you have, how you've been doing, if you're tracking that towards an op, if you had to spot a certain number of tanks, or if you had to have a certain number of assist damage, or whatever have you, you can track all that stuff. So it's fantastic to see all that stuff right back up there on the top left, the icon, and that's where it really belongs. On this battle results page that you see right now, they've done away with that multi-tab setup where you had to tab through 3 different tabs, where here in this one tab you had both pieces of information for both the medals and ribbons that you have achieved in battle, and also how you performed and did in battle. The other tab with the end results with all the tanks listed, when you actually clicked into one of those tanks, it's fantastic because it then shows you more details about how that particular person did. And then there's also something called an efficiency tab. They lost the efficiency tab sometime during the update from 4 months ago, but it's now back. It's fantastic. I love it. This view, this large map view, is something that I'm happy to see back in the game again. What they had done prior was they made it a 2-tab system. You had to flip between 2 different tabs to see what tanks were on which team, and you no longer have that. You just hit that button, you can tell immediately, these are a list of tanks, that's the list of tiers, that's the list of kills that they have, this is what platoons they belong to, this is the big giant map, and you can see all that information within a single tab of that large map display. It's fantastic, it's clear, easy to read, and it doesn't have the flip back and forth nonsense that we've had for the past 4 months. On the bottom of this, on the bottom right of this, you see the actual mini-map. That's also now easier to read. It's a little bit larger, but it has nice, clear black lines that very clearly distinguish what map grid is where. So when you are communicating with teammates, or if you're trying to point out a certain area, it becomes very clear what you're trying to point out. Under the past update, what they've done is they've actually had these white lines that were very hard to read because at that point they had a translucent map. So it kind of blurred into the background of the map, which kind of then blurred into whatever was behind the map. In this version, it's a very opaque map. So you have those clear black lines on an opaque map on a very clearly labeled numerical and alphabetical system. It's fantastic, it's easy to read, it's easier to tell teammates, ping, whatever have you, of things that you are looking at, aiming at, or targeting. The nice thing also is they've added some more words. So, for example, if we were looking back towards the bottom left of the screen, under the targeted and Sixth Sense, the actual words of what they are right next to those icons. Instead of just having just the plain icons, you now know, oh, that little light bulb icon, that means Sixth Sense is off. That's fantastic. For newer players who might not be familiar with those little icons, they might not understand what those icons mean, because as of the last version of this game, they didn't have those words to explain exactly what those different symbols and messages meant. And the other nice thing is, if you look on the bottom left of the screen, you can see all the different modules for the tank. You can tell that they are grayed out, but they're there, so you can at least visually tell if one of the other modules is broken. Oh, my engine's fine because I can still see my engine. Here, I'm tracked. My tracks are broken, but not my engine. Why do I know that? Because my engine symbol is still grayed out, but my track symbol is the one that's lit. And there's a nice little circular icon that tells me it's being repaired and the status of that repair. That's all within that one little area on the bottom left of the screen. That didn't exist in prior versions from 4 months ago, where they've separated that into multiple different places. They now, they briefly had, and you won't believe me when I say this, they briefly had a little repair hammer that had a separate circle that was completely separate of the icon of the module of the thing being repaired. So you had it in 2 completely different places. Here they've consolidated it back into one place, and it is absolutely fantastic. One nice additional change that they've made is they have reintroduced the number of people capping on the cap icons. So in addition to making the cap icon circular again, which make more sense because the cap circles are actual circles, they also tell you now how many players are capping a base. So you actually have an idea of how many tanks you need to reset or where the remaining tanks might be on a map in a situation like this where, for example, there's only 4 tanks left. Are there 1 tank on my base? Are there 2 tanks on my base? Or are there no tanks on my base? This is a very easy way of telling that information. Some of the other things I'd like to talk about quickly is outside of battle. They now have a repeatable tutorial for newer players. That was something that we used to have, and I'm happy to see that they've brought that back in. So, unlike this new version where there is a one tutorial that you can play, there's no method of repeating it. For a newer player who's trying to get their feet wet, who's trying to understand how things generally work, now they're really kind of forced into playing a match because there are only 3 options. There's either playing the commander mode, which is not really the main core game. They can play live battles like this, but if they don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're doing. They're going to be learning things the hard way. And there just isn't the proving grounds that used to exist prior to the 6.0 update. So I'm happy that they've brought that back in. They've brought proving grounds back in. They've brought in war stories back in. They've brought in different methods for players to experiment outside of the main battle so that they can get accustomed to the different tanks in their garage and not have to worry about being tossed into a match and try to figure it out while live in a match. Other things include also the tech tree. The tech tree is now legible again. So one of the nice things about the current version of the tech tree is that unlike the ones that were in the what I'm calling the beta test phase, the tech tree you can see everything within very few clicks. Within the premium tank tech tree, you're able to view all of that without having to scroll back and forth in this big giant pile of mess of tanks. It's still very clear, it's very easy to read. This latest system it's a great improvement over that last system. And lastly, it's just the silver economy. It works like the way it used to. The complexity of the game is fantastic. They've brought back things like camo nets and binoculars, which made the game a little bit more complex, made the game a little bit more strategic, so those aspects are back. And also, the global accuracy buff has been removed, which is great because now that actual difference between tank classes becomes more apparent. It's now harder as a heavy tank to snipe at a distance because that really isn't the role of a heavy tank. Whereas with that new global accuracy buff that they had for the past 4 months, it kind of blurred the lines between all different classes of tanks. Because you're able to view so much of the map as a medium tank, light tanks didn't really have much of a role. Light tanks got sniped out because every tank is accurate now, and this is a bit of a nice way of rolling that all back. View ranges and everything else, because now you have binos and now you have camouflage nets again, light tanks can now be used more effectively as spotters. So there are little things like that. It's been fantastic to see that they've changed all that, and I'm looking forward really to what's next. I mean, I'm just really excited, I'm really ecstatic, and I'm happy to look forward to next month. Thanks, guys.